All right, so really quick here, let's make a video on, or let's just kind of talk about the difference between a single flare plug and a double flare plug, okay? The first thing we'll point out is the obvious difference. Your single flare plug is going to have a plug or a flare on one end. It's going to kind of be straight throughout the rest of the plug. Whereas a double flare plug is going to have a flare on both ends, and then you're going to have a bit of a saddle in the middle, okay? Here I have kind of one of each. What we're going to use these plugs for, or why do we have the difference in flares on these two plugs? I really like for the single flare plug to use for like initial stretching, and also to use during more so in the beginning stages of being at a certain size. What do I mean when I say that? Your single flare plug, because it doesn't have a flare on the back end and it's just straight, your wearing surface continues all the way throughout the entire plug. So say you're at a 0 gauge, okay? The back of the plug is also going to be a 0 gauge. Now, what that helps me is, say when I'm going to stretch your ears, I have a taper, I can butt this up against the back of the taper. It's going to create a seamless fit, and I can slide it into your ear with minimal, if no damage at all, and no tearing or anything that's going to cause blowouts or anything of that nature, okay? A great style of plug for when you're stretching, also for the very beginning stages of wearing a certain size, just because it's going to slide in and out really easy, and you're not going to worry about causing any tears or damage to an ear. With the single flare plug, to compensate for not having that flare in the back, you're going to have a little rubber O-ring or a grommet that's going to kind of just slide onto the back, and that's what kind of keeps it in place, okay? You do want to be a little bit more conscious that you don't lose that O-ring, but for the most part, they stay on there really well. I've worn them for years and years, and I've very rarely had problems with the O-rings coming off, okay? But it does happen, so just be conscious about it. But for the most part, they're great. They're really good plugs. Now, your second, probably the most common style of plug you're going to get is a double flare plug, okay? And like I said a second ago, a double flare is going to be a plug with flares on both ends, and you have that saddle in the middle, okay? That's a great plug for when you've been at a size and you're established at a size for a little bit of time. As a general rule of thumb, 3 to 4 weeks is pretty standard before you want to start wearing double flare plugs. So start with the single flare plug. Once you've been at size for 3 or 4 weeks, you should be able to get a double flare plug in there really quick or really easily. You wouldn't want to start with a double flare plug or stretch with a double flare plug, because that flare on the end is usually a 1/16 of an inch bigger than your wearing surface. So you would have to double stretch your ear to get that plug in there, and that is definitely going to lead to tearing, possibly blowouts, and even some hypertrophic scarring or scar tissue in the back of your ear. Obviously, what you don't want. Tearing is something when you're stretching ears you always want to avoid. Actually, all of those things you always want to avoid when you're stretching your ears. So start with single flare plugs, then switch over to double flare plugs. There's a few different styles of well, I guess just in plugs in general. You have wood, stone, all those other things. They're all going to come in one or the other. Just figure out what your intended purpose for those plugs are, whether you're using them for stretching or you just recently stretched and you don't think you'll be able to get a flare through your ear. And if that's the case, look at single flare plugs. If you've been at that size for a while, and then you can start wearing double flare plugs. And then also, there's no one way or the other you should go. I mean, in the beginning, after you just freshly stretch your ears, or if you're stretching your ears, I would definitely suggest, without a doubt, hands down, go single flare plugs. But once you've been at it for a while, I know plenty of people who they only like wearing single flare plugs. They don't like double flares at all. And I mean, like me, myself, for example, when I was wearing plugs, I only wore double flare, but after I had stretched and I was at a size for a while, okay? So hopefully that kind of explains the whole single flare and double flare thing. It's not rocket science, but then again, it could be a little confusing, I guess. I don't know. But yeah, that's all it is.